Cliff, all hands on deck. What did you think?
I thought this was a really entertaining film. It was, very gentle, very entertaining, naturalistic. I really thought the conversations were, felt very natural. The acting was really good, and it was funny. It did make me laugh quite a few times or smile. At some level, it's the kind of film that you can almost smile your whole way through. It's like I just found the characters so kind of compelling. All that said, I know that I'm a bit obsessed by this question, but I did start wondering why this film is on Mubi, because I wonder is this really an art house movie? And because at one level it's kind of a funny holiday romance movie. It's a really good one, but I wonder what I couldn't help starting asking the question: is this something that you would watch more on Netflix than on Mubi? And and as that question went on, I was thinking, if the two main characters, Felix and Sharif, were white, would this be a film that was shown on Mubi? And I'm in all honesty, I don't know whether there's a kind of racism in me even asking that question. But in all honesty, I don't think, I wasn't sure whether it would. But as the film went on, I started to feel that this isn't just a simple holiday romance movie, that actually there are deeper meanings in this film. And so in the end, I do feel that it kind of qualifies, whatever the qualification is in terms of being an art house movie and being shown on Mubi. I did feel that it was in the right place. I think it's so striking that, and I have to believe this is a conscious, deliberate decision on the part of the director, that there are no other Black people in this place where the campsite is. I think in one scene we see a Black person just right up the street, but it's such a white place, the kind of holiday place. And so these two Black people stand out so much in this place, and yet in some ways they both completely fit in. And I thought it was, so one thing that I thought was very interesting in this film is that they never encountered, I don't think, they never encountered any racism. That's why I wonder if it's even racist to raise the issue of their color, because in some ways, why don't you just watch this film and not notice the colors? But I do think that it is a deliberate decision to make the film in this way. But what's really interesting is that even though there was no racism, there's kind of still an issue. I was almost waiting for someone to be racist. I was almost waiting for them to have a horrible experience of someone being racist to them, and it kind of never happened. And so I felt there was a little bit of tension created from that. I mean, the film always is enjoyable and light and funny, but I kind of felt there was this subtext of, you never quite knew whether there was going to be some racism around the corner. And so I thought this was quite interesting, actually, because, they, in some ways, their color was irrelevant. No one ever raised it as an issue. So there was, that's how things should be. But I don't feel that the film really made any conclusions around this, but I do think there was something deliberate there. I mean, and this came out in various expected ways, because we do hear Sharif at one point, the main guy's friend, talking about that business school isn't for him. It's kind of for rich people, and implicit in that, where I think there could have been a racial element. But then I think, actually it wasn't racial, that, because most of the characters in this film have insecurities or are unhappy. And, it is a film about what happens when you go on holiday and let your hair down a bit. And, I think most of the characters, if not all of them, were kind of finding themselves on this holiday. The guy who drove them down. And I loved the comedy around that, the way they kept calling him Kitten. And I thought that was great. Edouard with the karaoke, he had his issues, and he had this amazing night where he lets his hair down, and obviously the mum with the baby and the guy who helps out with the babysitting, he is a good example. So it's like everyone here is something special is happening for them on holiday. So overall I thought this film was gentle, entertaining, subtle, that it was that it's kind of a coming of age movie, not really coming of age because it was about 20 somethings rather than teenagers, but it was about growing up in your 20s, but with important racial subtexts that were never really, well, they were kind of explicit because of the decision to place these two Black people in such a white area with no apparent racism, but also working really at quite a subtle level. So I don't know if I've kind of overanalyzed this, but that was my view on it. I really enjoyed it. I was sorry it finished, actually. I could quite happily have spent longer with these characters in that world.
That's a really interesting reading of it. I liked it less. I think it's got very bald plot mechanics, which I found quite interesting. So the setup is, he randomly comes across this dance party in the street, meets this girl, decides to surprise her. They carpool, the car breaks down, they're stuck at this holiday camp. This is really straightforward, almost kind of brazen plotting. And I wondered if this is obvious and unambitious, or in fact quite frank and sophisticated, as though the filmmaker is being really upfront about how manipulative plotting inherently is. And I started to think, if that's what he's doing, then I'm actually on side with it, because I've always felt a bit, I talk about it quite a lot, but I've always had this kind of uneasiness about the manipulative nature of plotting, and that a successfully plotted film is one in which we don't realize we're being manipulated. There's some kind of uneasy subterfuge in that. And sometimes I prefer a filmmaker who's very frank about it and says, this is what we're doing, and I'm not going to disguise any of it. So I was kind of undecided about whether it was sort of heavy-handed and a bit clunky, or if it was actually doing something really interesting. And it has, on the side of it being quite an interesting film, it makes very really interesting use of the edit. So occasionally, sort of mid-conversation or mid-argument, the film will cut, and whatever tension we've been sort of dragged into has been resolved. The moment's passed. And there's something really interesting about this continual undercutting of its own drama, which suggests the film is doing something. So I think on balance, it's kind of low-key but interesting, at least structurally in the way it's put together. The problem I had, and it's identical to the problem you had, is that I was constantly waiting for the film to turn into something else. And I think for two reasons. Firstly, because it's on movie, and most of the films we watch here tend to have something sort of unusual or striking about them. And also because it was, for me, reminiscent of the film we'd watched the previous week, Friends and Strangers, that similarly low-key feel,
yes,
campsite. Yeah. And so it was in the back of my mind. And of course, that film was so surprising and unusual that I couldn't help but sort of, perhaps unfairly, expect this film to go off in a different direction. It became clear about an hour in that, no, the film I'm watching is the film I'm watching. This is what I've got. And I never particularly cared much about Felix. I didn't think that their relationship had really any stakes. It didn't matter to me whether they got together or not. I found the other story, the guy and the woman with the baby, that was very gentle and pleasant, and I was happy they got together because he was a really likable character. And so I found it kind of gentle and diverting, but ultimately a fairly pointless comedy. I did find myself a few times wondering if there is some subtext here. As you say, they talk less about race, but I was thinking in terms of like that one of them talks about capitalism, and then there's a speech about climate change halfway through it. And I thought, is there a subtext here so subtle I'm missing it? Or are these just sort of faux philosophical interjections in a sort of Jim Jarmusch kind of meandering but ultimately pointless way? And I think it's probably the latter, that these are just diversionary conversations in the middle of a very gentle film. So it was fine, and I enjoyed it enough. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't glad it ended, but it's fine for me that it ended when it did. So yeah, it was okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we kind of are agreeing, aren't we? That that, you know, in some ways, I mean, I think I probably enjoyed it more than you. If I'd watched this on Netflix, I would be kind of perfectly happy with it. You know, it's a fun, entertaining film, and I think, you know, a lot of people would enjoy this film who wouldn't normally watch a film on Mubi, let's say. But I agree about Felix. He was, you know, we've had a few films recently where we've talked about ambiguous characters, and there was a little bit of ambiguity with him. He was a bit moody, wasn't he? And he was you know, and even Sharif makes that point at one time, you know, kind of says to Edouard, he, you know, he is a good guy, you know, he's a bit quirky, but he's a good guy. But I agree that Sharif was just, you know, so sweet, so nice, so, you know, and that relationship was really lovely, you know, and I was happy that, you know, he got the girl in the end, although there's all questions about her husband and, you know, what happens next. But I guess that's holiday romance, you know, that's the kind of thing that happens. Yeah, by the end of it, I kind of want to believe that there are important subtexts to this, that it's not just, you know, that it's not just doing what it appears to do, that there is something underneath it, that there are some deliberate things. But to be honest, I'm not 100% sure.
Well, I'm willing to grant that. As I say, you know, it was clearly put together in a really thoughtful way, and I don't think it's clumsily handled, the plotting. This is clearly deliberate. It's clearly quite a clever film.
Yeah.
But the subtext passed me by. It really did. And I found those ambiguities at the beginning just kept me thinking this is going to be a more interesting film than it ultimately was. So yeah.
Isn't there something? Isn't it possibly interesting that we were expecting something to happen, but it didn't?
Yeah. I feel like.
Or did the film not create that? Is that an expectation created by watching a film on Mubi, as you described, or did the film actually do something to make it feel like something could happen?
I don't feel like it did. No, I feel like that was something I brought to the film, because I think taken on its own terms, it's a gentle comedy. You know, there isn't really much else there. There's no real sense of threat. There's nothing kind of jarring or inexplicable about it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting discussion.
Yeah.
What are we doing next?
Next up is an Austrian movie called The Trouble with Being Born by Sarah Warner.
Looking forward to it.